Jeff Carter with Seattle City Club, and today, as part of the Civic Boot Camp on Housing Insecurity, I'll be talking with Bill Kirlin-Hackett, Director of the Interfaith Task Force on Homelessness. Welcome, Bill, and thank you for joining me.
Thanks for the invitation.
So first off the bat, what is the Interfaith Task Force on Homelessness?
Well, we started in 2001, and it was a large event held at St. Mark's Cathedral in Seattle. And the question was asked by the dean at the time, what is the region doing to end homelessness? And they were hosting Tent City 3 and in their parking lot. And we had 350 people come, and including civic leaders, religious leaders, and many others. And that day we all wrote an action plan on how to proceed with a plan to end homelessness. The first action in it was to create our task force so faith communities would work together. And the second part of the plan was to create the Committee to End Homelessness, which ended up writing the first 10-year plan. So we were sort of the birthplace for all of that. And they proceeded to write the plan. And it took close to 4 years before they released the first plan. And we were already up and running at the end of 2001, largely just around gathering faith communities to educate and advocate around ending homelessness. At that time, we weren't doing any direct service. And our home was St. Mark's Cathedral, and our first director was David Bloom, who had worked for the church council for many years and had run for, well, at that point, he hadn't run for city council. It was later. And we just really started regionally going around and gathering faith communities together in meetings and helping educate them and educating ourselves about homelessness. At that time, there was very little coordinated work across the county, and many cities had just a meager human services budget. But we started having monthly meetings, and we actually had, and that was the first of an annual event that we continued every year. We stopped at 16 annual events in 2016, just because it was getting harder and harder for folks around the county to come to one place. And we began using other ways, other media means. So we've always been very low key, always used a fiscal agent, a congregation or a nonprofit. So we've always been light on our feet, so to speak. Didn't have a board that I had to go to find out if we had permission to do something. We always had the flexibility to do it quickly. Mm-hmm. So we've changed a little bit over the years, but we've always kept being fluid and responsive at the top of the list.
And what is the role? What role do you think religious institutions play in addressing homelessness?
Well, historically, in almost every region of the country, but I'll just speak at what I recall and know here. The Church Council of Greater Seattle played a large role in forming nonprofits such as Downtown Emergency Service Center, and Plymouth Church formed Plymouth Housing Group. We've got many, what we look at as institutions now addressing homelessness, who were started by faith communities. So often a faith community has been an initiator more than a sustaining nonprofit towards homelessness. That's not usually their prime mission, is to become an agency to end homelessness, but we still have many who are starting initiatives such as Lake Washington United Methodist Church took seriously after hosting tent cities. It took seriously hosting people in vehicles, and they become almost the prime go-to resource. Well, resource is the wrong word. Let's say location for people who need a safe place off the streets and are living in a vehicle and want to get out of the vehicle. And so some faith communities are doing that, safe parking, we're calling it. And we've got places in Kent and Covington and other places in Bellevue doing that. And in many other ways, like Lake City, Seattle Mennonite has taken a great lead and role in the whole Lake City community to help both its development, but its wise development so that it takes care of everybody, including as best able those on the streets. So I think faith communities also, there are landlords who are members of faith communities, and we try to put a moral imperative into their hearts where maybe they'll find ways to house those who don't have enough income if they don't have a voucher or something else. Mm-hmm. So, and then of course there's the leaders. there have been many faith leaders who've been very prominent in the city, and maybe we're having fewer and fewer of those than we used to. But I know Pastor Brown at Plymouth and many others at St. James Cathedral and others have been leaders who speak out on behalf of the region being more responsive. That has maybe diminished over the years, just in the way of being a moral authority. But I think faith communities are still very prominent and evident, and on our buildings and properties are things we're looking at using more and more, especially around developing housing on faith community property and using faith community property for shelter. Those things have sustained.
Mhm.
So actually, we're looking ahead toward even more development on faith community property for low-income housing, simply because the land is, I guess I could say, accessible on bus lines, and with the right partners, becomes a good source of land for people who need housing and who are going to be able to make their home someplace other than in a tent or a car or a small house. So the movement around that is escalating a bit, but COVID has thrown a wrench into a lot of things right now. So folks are still trying to figure out when they can even go back in their building. It's, I think the governor has 25% occupancy now, and people are still afraid of that, especially the people over 50. So
Yeah.
yeah, it slowed everything down, but we're all still talking about it. And there's been some legislative bills. We even got one passed last year, all aimed at improving the ways faith communities can use their property to help the vulnerable.
Well, you mentioned the safe parking initiatives. Can you tell me more about what you're doing to help people living in vehicles? What are your programs in general?
Well, we helped start the first safe parking in Seattle, and it was run by Compass Housing formally, and we helped congregations become a part of it. It gradually sort of fell apart, I guess I would say, because there really wasn't adequate funding. There was no pathway to housing. The housing was just not available. The waiting list became cumbersome. And then recently, a couple of years ago, the Urban League started doing safe parking with funding from the city of Seattle. It's still just maybe a dozen to a dozen and a half spaces. So it's very small response, I guess I'd call it. We worked with the Urban League last year, and we're working with University Heights Center this year doing scofflaw mitigation. I'll have to explain that. In 2011, the city passed a law, the scofflaw law, which means someone like you, and I'll say you in particular, have a lot of tickets you're not paying. So they come across you when you're parking, they scan your plate and they find out you're not paying your tickets. So they put a boot on your vehicle, hoping you will pay and then get the boot released. Well, the problem with the law was it included everybody, including the many who are living in their vehicles. And so it created a difficult situation for people living in vehicles who didn't have current tabs, couldn't afford to get current tabs, or take care of tickets. So we sort of jumped into the breach with the help of Mayor McGinn and his staff, and the police department and the municipal court and parking enforcement, and created a program called the Scofflaw Mitigation Program. And we've been doing it since 2011. And what we do is we get indications, we get a notice from parking enforcement that someone's at risk of scofflaw. So, you see the parking enforcement officers going around in their small little carts and sometimes in cars, scanning license plates, and they can see who's scofflaw eligible. In other words, if you have 4 or more tickets, or they see that your tabs are expired. Rather than just lower the boom on you, they call out to us to do outreach. So harm suspends while we're doing outreach. So what we're trying to do is get you into the court, which has some programs for folks who are in your situation, and works out community service or payment plans to get your tickets paid off and to become street legal, with current tabs and so on. So as long as you keep obeying the law, you won't lose your vehicle. We've done that pretty successfully for 10 years. And now the city, last year, it took a long time to get it rolling, but this year we hit the ground running in 2021. We're just doing just general vehicle outreach and going around and trying to do the same thing, because parking enforcement is under a moratorium. They're not going around doing the same thing they were doing. The mayor had issued a moratorium on having to move every 72 hours. But we're doing outreach to people in vehicles and trying to get them referred to shelter if they're willing to go. And not many in vehicles want to do that, but get them into the homeless management information system where they at least have a pathway to housing, and or fulfill other needs, food cards, gas cards, other things like that. We've also started going around with the St. Vincent de Paul folks who accompany the Seattle Public Utilities RV clean out. It's they go around now so that RVs are not dumping on the street.
So they pump out their septic tanks.
Pump out, yeah. Mm-hmm. So we're accompanying them so we can address the people and try to get them into this program. Not really a program, but get them into the system where we can begin to help those who are ready to get out of their vehicle. So we have a couple of staff. It's way underfunded. We have a couple of staff and a few people helping them. And we're doing it right now. The problem is, they spend whatever number you want to come up with, $60, $70 million on homelessness out of the city of Seattle. And this program has $80,000 devoted to it. Wow. And that $80,000 is the only $80,000 out of all that money going to people living in vehicles. And people in vehicles made up half of the unsheltered count the last time we did a countywide count. So the
Which
reality
is about, what, 6,000 people?
A little off there,
Yeah. How many people would that be? Around 6,000?
Well, the total number of sheltered is just under, it was 5,500 plus. The last time we did it, I'm sure it's higher now, but we didn't do a count this year. Yeah. And the number of vehicles is half that. Mm-hmm. So we know that that was the number of people they estimated using a formula. So we're just in the neighborhood of 3,000 people, okay, but probably more than that because there's been a lot of movement out of units because of job loss. Mm-hmm. And we can just see the numbers on the street increasing. And they've given us a whole $80,000 to fix it. So, and there's no safe parking for RVs. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, I mean, it is something the new regional homelessness authority that's forming will have to put on the very front burner of its actions once it hits, once it really starts addressing homelessness at the end of this year.
You mentioned, do you about the trends and people living in cars and RVs? Is it increasing? There seems to be a perception that it is. And
yes. And it's everything's increasing. The visibility of tents, we think that number is also increasing. The visibility of RVs, and we think that number is increasing. Mm-hmm. And some of it's coming from job loss and people who haven't been protected by eviction moratoriums for whatever reasons. It's not everybody who is protected by those moratoriums. Maybe they're not. Maybe they're doubled or tripled up, and they have to be the ones who leave a unit. So there's all kinds of stories and reasons. Yeah. Some fleeing domestic violence. I'm helping a woman right now who's fleeing domestic violence in an RV that doesn't work. Mm-hmm. So it's heartbreaking work, actually, because these are stories that we keep having to listen to and help. And oftentimes there is no help. So you kind of
touched on this already, but what are the specific challenges that people who are living in their cars or vehicles or RVs face that other unsheltered people may not face?
Well, it's not a lot different than people in a tent. The cold that we've had is just terrible. There aren't very many good ways to create heat in an RV that doesn't run. Mm-hmm. And if you keep it running, you're using up a lot of expensive gas. But even just getting parked somewhere where you can keep food on your table or in your tent, whatever, it's not that different there. Keeping current on legal issues. They're not giving out as many tickets if you're parked legally right now, but if your tabs expire, you can still get tickets for that. It's kind of expensive to stay living in an RV, to stay legal. Your driver's license has to stay current. You can actually lose your vehicle if you have a suspended license. Usually that's for a moving violation. A lot of these RVs aren't moving anymore. They're not running because of the fact that they haven't had to move.
Yeah.
So that's becoming a problem.
Hmm.
It's and then just the usual things that everybody faces, and they just have so much fewer resource. Um, One of the hard things across the board for all homeless people are public restrooms. There's just too few now. Most, it's even hard to find a Starbucks while we're doing outreach that'll actually let us use a restroom.
Mm.
I can think of two in the city right now, two
Wow.
across, one in West Seattle, one in Georgetown. There may
Mm.
be more, but most of them, you can't even do that. So even outreach is difficult for outreach workers right now,
Mm.
um, unless you have a nearby office. So I just think the whole thing right now is on hold. Try to stay healthy if you can. We give out masks and sanitizer and other things for COVID. Um, if the folks stay isolated, they're probably less at risk. They can't go to libraries; they're not open, but they would be at risk if they did. So
Mhm.
I mean, it's not that different from what others of us are facing in terms of the risk of the pandemic. But at the same time, all of the parts of being homeless are harder right now.
Yeah.
Even some of the food banks aren't, you don't really get in them. They bring something out to you and they've got reduced hours.
Hmm.
So I just think, it's not something we see the city with a good outline for. And I think you probably have heard at least they don't have a good outline for people in tents right now. They don't have a good outline for people in RVs. And we call in when someone wants shelter, and there might be 5 or fewer beds available per week. And for a person in an RV or people in an RV, they're not going to leave the RV to go into a shelter right now. It's just doesn't make sense.
You
All their
go.
all their assets are in that RV,
Mm. Hmm.
and you can't take that many with you to a shelter. So
Right. Yeah. What?
I'm placing a woman now. In fact, I just got the call before we started that we're going to be able to get her into a 24-hour shelter in SeaTac, which is a hotel room, which is beautiful for her. But she's been living for 8 weeks now in an RV that doesn't run. It's just
And
it's
what
just
happens to the RV?
Well, it's in her name, so we'll either junk it or she'll sell it or gift it to somebody. Somebody could do some work on it and make it a place to live. Um, but oh my goodness, it just started pouring rain. Sorry,
It's okay.
life is coming in here.
That's
Um,
okay.
um, yeah, at this point we're just advising her to just be rid of it. If she
Yeah.
has to sell it for $10, let someone else use it who needs it, and maybe they'll do some work on it and get it running. It's not as bad as many I see. Let me put it that way.
Hmm.
Some of them I won't even go inside, um, and people just get used to it. It's the same as what tents look like. It's a hard life being homeless.
Are there certain areas of the city you've noticed that have changed or grown in terms of RV vehicle occupancy, like Georgetown or somewhere
Well,
else? Or
Georgetown has just broadened and gotten bigger, in terms of its outer boundary. And I think the business association down there, we're in meetings with them as well. It spills up above into Sodo, and it's in some ways almost becoming one big long swath of people
mm,
parking around. Although there's some industrial areas there where you can't park, but there's amazing uh, creativity by people in RVs about where they find the capacity to park.
mhm.
I've had some addresses given to me by parking enforcement that I have to call them to find out how to, a map doesn't even help. Uh,
Wow.
People are just trying to find a place where they don't have to keep moving and
Mhm.
where they think they're safe. And a lot of them are, sometimes they're in a neighborhood, but many times they're in some very, very industrial area. Um, it's
Yeah.
just, it's survival. I mean, I think about what would I do, and I would do what I had to do to survive
Mhm.
within as much as I could. Um, so I think it's interesting. You mentioned, where you used to do the civic walkarounds. Those aren't bad things to still do if you can find safe ways to do them,
Mhm.
and just look and learn, not look and judge. I wouldn't ever
Right.
advise that. Look and learn.
Yeah.
some of our folks will, who do the outreach, will take folks around with them now and then, just to give them a sense of what's going on, because it's so easy to drive by and make judgments.
Mm-hmm.
And many of these people had a job within the last few years, and or some still have a job right now.
Mm-hmm.
And I was talking to one of my colleagues earlier today about an encampment that apparently got swept because all the people were away at their jobs.
Oh, no.
Now, as far as we hear, they're not supposed to be getting swept right now, and who knows why it got swept. We don't know.
Yeah.
So it's just, and so in the meantime, during the course of doing all this, we've had an educational curriculum. We did annual events. The last one we did in 2016 was called Car Talk, but we were trying to form a strategy for beginning to address vehicles. And at that time, the All Home strategic plan came and joined in with us. It didn't do much good to give them a strategy on how to deal with this because they never put in any money toward it. I wrote a book about this for faith communities to help use our educational curriculum about how to engage people. Craig Rennebaum, the former mental health chaplain, wrote a book, and many, like Rex Holbein, Facing Homelessness, were so moved by it. Rex started Facing Homelessness.
Yeah.
And it was how to engage in a conversation with someone who's homeless. And often we have a monkey brain and we think we want to fix. And so our first questions are, I would ask you what you need for me to fix your homelessness instead of just listening to you. So the whole message was listen, and it's remarkable how many good ideas people who are in homelessness have. And so the new system that's coming out is being built on listening to people who are homeless. And they've populated the boards accordingly. We'll see if it works. It's the right theory, but people who have been in power are used to just giving instructions and orders, not listening. Just comes with the territory. I'm not picking on anybody in particular. And one of the things people who are in homelessness often learn is what the next steps are to help them, instead of us telling them what the next step is. So it's time consuming. It's rare that we go to one vehicle and all of a sudden have a remedy for somebody.
Right.
The woman who's going into shelter tomorrow, I've been working with her since the first week of January. And that's probably about 12 hours a week just on her, because she's got unique situation that makes it harder for her to be homeless. And that's often what it takes. It only takes a little while to become homeless. It takes a long while to get out of it.
Yeah.
Of course, by little while, I mean, it's often a series of bad circumstances or decisions or events. Sometimes there's we contribute to some of it on our own, but most of it is just a series of bad events with no safety net.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
What is the name of the book you mentioned that you wrote?
The stones would shout. It's from a biblical verse about, if these were silent, the stones would shout out, about, Christian, Jesus going into Jerusalem. But it's really a term we use for advocacy, that we can't stay silent. We have to lift our voices and begin to keep advocating, We need to make sure that we're bringing the attention of what's needed to the public sector that has the money, as well as to philanthropists and others. And even to faith communities that have these assets like land. I say our buildings sit empty too much of the time. Our land is not being used. That's just not good stewardship.
Yeah.
So more and more people are beginning to look at that and asking the questions themselves. And we're trying to promote it. So, and it's in part, the book is also the story of the ITFH from 2001. Just, you too can create a movement. Yeah,
so
I know.
I'm curious what you've seen that has worked. I mean, we often hear about the problems and the challenges, but have you seen examples of things either here in Seattle or neighborhoods or other places, or in your work that you've seen that actually have some?
Yeah, I started out with some of that. I think not waiting for the public sector or the philanthropists to do it. And that's how faith communities help start the ESC and Plymouth Housing and others. And the faith community, Lake Washington United Methodist right now, hosting people in vehicles. Some of those people are passing through. They've gotten stabilized. They have their kids in school. I think now they're just having women and or women with children. But once they get stabilized and then they are working, they can save some money. And with the help of a nonprofit like Sophia Way or others, they can get into housing. So sometimes the best thing that those who are homeless need is just a safe respite, a safe place to be off the street, to know that you have food, to know that you have others who will help you and around whom you're safe. There are just too few places like that.
Yeah.
And faith communities have a unique opportunity to provide more of that. But it takes courage. And, it takes not listening to all the people who are going to tell you Seattle's dying and we're being overrun by homeless people. It may look like that, but those people were you 6 months ago, and if 6 months from now, which side of it do you want to be on if you hit trouble? Would you want someone coming out to help you? Someone like me or my colleague, Joe Ingram, or somebody like that. Joe was homeless when he started this work last year. The Salvation Army was putting him up in a hotel, and now Joe's in housing again. That's how quickly it can happen. And I'd rather have someone like Joe listening to me if I'm homeless than I would having the system tell me to go get in line, to go get in line, and to go get in line. And where's your papers? The system it's not built friendly. And that's why there's hope in the new regional authority that in listening to people who are homeless and the Lived Experience Coalition, the system itself will learn to be better. And to not put in place things that are like a 300-mile cattle drive. That doesn't work. We've proven it doesn't work. It didn't work for the 10-year plan. It didn't work for the 5-year all home plan. And so we'll see. I probably won't be around to see it when it really starts working. I'm old enough now that I probably need to stop soon. Who knows? I don't know. I don't know how to get out of this. I need a replacement. I'm recruiting you today, by the way.
Okay.
No, I think that I think people need to deal with this in a people-centered way. That's the big issue, people-centered way, and not systemic.
Yeah, I guess you've already sort of addressed this, but my question is that there's a lot of people who I think feel disillusioned with our system, that we can't take care of people, and so I wonder how you can give them hope, that change is possible and that things can move in a positive direction.
Yeah, and it needs to be smaller and regional approaches.
Yeah.
I think that's the hope in this new plan, is it's going to be regional. Of course, so far we're off to a roaring start. Mercer Island is making all the homeless people move off the island. They're saying it's for a good reason, but you know what? They could have done the same thing right on their island. Yeah. And that's where someone needs to come in and tell them that. You could have done the same thing you're trying to do right on your island and taken care of them, because they're your neighbors. That's where they live right now.
Yeah.
And so it's going to take that kind of educating each time a jurisdiction out there, the other 38 cities besides Seattle, try to say, oh no, we'll have to send them someplace where they offer those services. Say, no, we need to offer those services, and we need to ask for the resources, help, and all that. Because the interesting thing about people who are homeless is that they're homeless in Kent. Kent is their home.
Yeah.
That's how they see it. I mean, this woman I'm helping, when she fled domestic violence in her RV, she went back to an area a mile from where she used to live 10 years ago.
Wow.
I mean, homeless people have the same sense of home that we do, geographically.
Yeah.
And see, we don't learn that when we're trying to fix it. We just say, well, we'll send them down to Covington. They have something down there.
Or Arizona. Yeah.
Or Arizona, yeah. No, there's a few people who want to, well, if someone who's homeless wants to go back to a home in another state that they think they can thrive at, there are funds to do that. But the problem is some people want to create that for them.
Yeah.
Want to say, here, we can really press this and help you get out of here.
Yeah.
But a lot of people who try that and it fails, they come back.
Yeah.
I mean, it all still comes back to not listening. And I think every business that works, people listen. Every job that satisfies us, we feel heard.
Mhm.
Every household that's healthy is about listening. You
Yeah.
know? So it does all come back to listening.
So people often ask, how can I get involved? What can I do? So I would ask you, what advice would you give people to get involved, and how could they support your work at the Interfaith Task Force?
Well, if they want to learn it all in one sitting, and you wouldn't quite learn it all, but if you want a good broad spectrum, they can read my book, or just get their faith community to buy it and they can share it and read it. Or you can just, you can ask to talk to someone like me or somebody else who's involved. You can go to a local nonprofit and start as a volunteer. I mean, DESC uses lots of volunteers from faith communities.
Mhm.
And there's a lot of folks who have the time to volunteer. If you're in a business and you're offering opportunities for your employees to donate, which happens, we're giving out money and you can donate. Ask a little bit more about who you're donating to and have the business educate you. I mean, if it's Microsoft, and I don't think we're on Microsoft's list. I don't know if maybe we are, but the organization itself should learn more about us. So
Mhm.
not so they're just sending, dollars and coins and checks and stuff rolling down the hill from Redmond
Mhm.
to wherever they're going to stop. I think it just takes better education.
Mhm.
And that's what I see when I hear from people who are living in Magnolia or wherever it is and are feeling personally offended by homelessness. I
Yeah.
think you need to learn a little bit more about what's going on and how you can actually help take care of what you see as a problem in a way that makes sense for you.
How could they encourage?
Judgment doesn't help.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How could they encourage their faith community to get involved if they're part of a faith community that may not be involved in
Oh,
homelessness?
they can just reach out to us.
Mhm.
We still go visit with people or connect with them or talk with them. We're not having our monthly meetings anymore, although now with Zoom I could resume them pretty easily, crossing my mind.
Yeah.
But same thing with the book. I have a Zoom presentation on it. We have a Zoom presentation on the bill we got passed last year, which
Mhm.
allows faith communities to host the homeless on their property without having to get permission from the local jurisdiction.
Okay.
That's revolutionary. It's statewide.
Wow.
We would have cities like Bellevue tell us, "Oh no, you can't host a tent city at your church."
Mm.
Well, they actually have no right to tell us that. The federal law protects faith communities on hosting the homeless.
Mm.
So we got it written into a state bill, 1754 from 2019, 2020. And now there's a little health and safety guidelines in it. But as far as hosting in your parking lot, indoors, in a tiny home, or what am I forgetting here? Indoor, safe parking, tiny home, or a tent encampment,
Mhm.
you can just start.
Oh, wow.
I mean, it's a revolutionary bill, and
Yeah.
it passed the House 95-3 last year. We even had, I'm a little stunned, I'm not a Republican, but Republicans were standing up praising the bill.
Wow.
I thought this must be a cold day or a warm day in hell. I don't know which it is, but but I'm a little shocked and pleased. But the point is, every faith community has the power to use its property now.
Yeah.
The thing we're
Yeah.
cautious about is it too risky? And it is a little risky, but there are still shelters in faith communities that are spatially appropriate,
Mhm.
that use masks, that
Mhm.
have all the right other things like panic bars and lighted exits and all those things.
Mhm.
So they could still host in their building,
Mhm.
um, but they could also begin longer term conversations about ways to use their property, which I go to a church in Federal Way. That's what we're doing. We're starting to talk about how to use this expansive property we have to put housing on it for people who are vulnerable. And
Mhm.
our pastor kind of wants to do lesbian, gay, LBGT, folks who are having trouble being housed.
Mhm.
That's great because there's not much housing dedicated to them, especially people who are poor, that is.
Right.
And I thought, wow, you can almost write your ticket these
Mhm.
days because there's funding to do the housing. There's legislation to give you more density on your property if you're a faith community.
Mhm.
I mean, the table's being set to do
Yeah.
more. And so, we can give them lots of ideas.
Mhm.
Um, it's just a matter of the will to do it and the
Yeah.
courage to do it.
Sounds like
So
a lot of
that
great
was our
opportunity.
original byline, creating the political will to end homelessness.
Yeah.
In
Well, it sounds
2001,
like
that was our byline.
it sounds like there's a lot of great opportunities out there. You know, it's tons of challenges, but lots of opportunities, especially it sounds
So
like the
we are hereby
big communities.
recruiting the city club, all members, whatever it takes to be a member.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for joining me today. Really appreciate. And
No,
you'll
I appreciate being asked. I know I went to a few city club events at least 10 years ago
yeah.
where I actually had to go in person, and I couldn't tell you who I saw. So I do appreciate the work you guys keep doing. So
Well,
thanks.
thank you. And your book again is The Stones Would Shout, right?
Yeah, available on Amazon, believe it
Amazon.
or
I
not.
saw it. Yeah, I looked it up.
Well, I used Kindle Direct Publishers. It was the shortest, fastest way to do away with an editor.
And your website is what ITFH? Wait, Interfaith.
It's ITF and then homeless, ITF homeless.
ITFhomeless.org. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's good to look at because we've got a red booklet on there that we did in partnership with the UW School of Art and Design, telling people in vehicles how to take care of their tickets. We've got another brochure that folds out to a giant wall thing that we did with them also on how to do safe parking at your faith community.
Mm-hmm.
So there's some useful things on there.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. I also have to thank our sponsor, Alaska Airlines, to help make this happen. Yeah.